At the G20 Summit here in New Delhi, at the International Media Center, what you have something very, very interesting for all the foreign delegates, for all the foreign journalists. One can really find out the history of India through these interactive LED panels where one can find out what has been Bharat, the mother of democracy. Something very interesting I'm showing you. What you need to do is connect your Wi-Fi, tap on the NFC, and what you have with yourself is the G20 brochure that opens on your phone. You can go to home, select a language of your choice, and then you have a documentary, and you can download this video and browse all the website content, and this will trace India's history of 7,000 years. The Bharat, the mother of democracy, Bharat, that is India, the view or the will of people in governance that has been a central part of life since earliest recorded history. Now this traces the democracy of India starting from Rig Veda to even modern elections, something that you must not miss if you are here at the G20 Summit.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.
And welcome to Business Today Television and Easynomics as we go live here from the International Media Center at the G20 Summit. And the big breaking news at this point of time, the Delhi Declaration from the G20 Summit has been adopted, and adopted with 100% unanimity, including some very contentious geopolitical issues. This is a huge win for India's presidency, a year during which Prime Minister Narendra Modi has invested considerable amounts of time and effort to get a global consensus. And this big consensus on key issues, financial matters, crypto, the Ukraine war, is extremely significant. Let's first listen into what the Prime Minister had to say.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं। इस अवसर पर मैं हमारे मंत्रीगण, शेरपा और सभी अधिकारियों का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं, जिन्होंने अथाक परिश्रम करके इसे सार्थक किया है, और इसलिए वे सभी अभिनंदन के अधिकारी हैं।
The cheers at the end of the Prime Minister's declaration that the G20 declaration is adopted, the Delhi Declaration, reflective of the mood inside the leaders' room. And what a day really for Indian diplomacy at the end of many months of significant hard work. And joining me now to discuss the Delhi Declaration and what it really means, not just for India but for the overall global economy, Shankkar Aiyar, Political Economy Analyst, author and columnist. Welcome, Shankkar. We also have Dr. Sunil Sinha, Senior Director and Principal Economist at India Ratings, and Dr. Subhash Garg, former Finance and Economic Affairs Secretary, someone who has first-hand knowledge of many of the elements that have really panned out over the last couple of hours, starting with the Prime Minister announcing the adoption of the Delhi Declaration, and then an extensive briefing by the G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, accompanied by other serving officials, taking us through the fine print of the entire Delhi declaration. And Shankkar, I want to come to you first to put it in context for our viewers. When the news first started filtering in earlier today that the Delhi Declaration had been adopted, and within minutes we saw the Prime Minister announcing that, it's been pretty quick, and subsequent details, the press conference has revealed that there is pretty much complete unanimity. Was this an outcome that you had expected, Shankkar?
Well, I had expected the declaration, and I had expected it to be sort of pushed through because there was considerable work put in that. The timing, I must say, was surprising because I expected it on Sunday. It's happened on Saturday. So I think it's excellent work done by the Sherpas, and I think it shows the level of preparedness that was there and the level of networking that has happened prior to the summit. I mean, to bring in Indonesia, Brazil, to get the emerging markets fixed. Because basically, I mean, what were we facing? We were facing the wall of China. And so they have leveraged dependencies, and they have leveraged specializations, special relationships, and brought this to book. I think the fact that Prime Minister Modi met President Biden a day before, and that has been a successful bilateral, also weighs on how other countries view India. So that's another aspect that has been helpful. I think if you look at the declaration, the most interesting para is para 13, which sort of encompasses much of what has been discussed in the world and much what was doubted. I find the use of the phrase territorial integrity very interesting. And then, the point that it makes about, it sort of encompasses, brings everything together, the international situation, climate, and draws all of it under the umbrella of one earth, one family, one future.
Absolutely, Shankkar, and I would say that in the past many years and several diplomatic events, I would say that this Delhi Declaration and its adoption and the manner and timing really at some point could well lead us to say that this is amongst India's finest diplomatic moments. Perhaps more to come, but Dr. Subhash Garg, I want to come to you. To focus on the finance and economy part of it, a 37-page declaration, and as Amitabh Kant said, that there is 100% unanimity, and during the conversation we'll try and bring you short snippets of what was said. But Dr. Garg, to you for your quick reading of the Delhi Declaration, especially from the point of view of the pressing economic agenda items.
Congratulations for accomplishing this most difficult outcome. Getting everyone agree on 112 paragraphs long Delhi Declaration and the joint communique is simply outstanding. So I think that's what need to be said. I haven't gone through the declaration. I have not had access to it. So I'm not in a position to specifically comment on the finance and other paragraphs which you are speaking of. I will have to go through because especially in view of the in view of the fact that all the ministerial declarations or the chair summary have not been of the consensus. There have been many issues, even on the finance track, on almost all issues, whether it's debt relief to the low-income countries or the cryptocurrencies or even on multilateral reforms. There wasn't really a consensus. Therefore, I need to see these before I comment on.
Fair point there, and in fact, viewers, I'm going to try and take you through some of those key highlights because this is a big document. The press conference, the last part of it, still underway, but with our guests, we'll try and decode it as much. Clearly, there will continue to be fine print that we'll have to understand. But just to cite Amitabh Kant once again, and we'll try and play that bite out as and when we have it, 83 paras in this document with 100% consensus, including 8 paras on geopolitical issues, which too have 100% unanimity and consensus. Amitabh Kant described the outcomes and 2.5 times of any other outcomes from any other G20 presidency earlier, and he also called it the most ambitious presidency in G20 history, specifically on the 10 key finance economic related agenda items. Dr. Garg was making a reference to some of them. I'll try and quickly rattle through some of those, even as those details play out on the screen, viewers. Digital public infrastructure, something that India has been talking about for quite some time now, has been integrated in the Financial Inclusion Action Plan, which will run between 2024 and 2026. So DPI, clear big endorsement for that. Good progress made on debt vulnerabilities, including success in using the G20 framework to address the debt of Zambia, Ghana and Ethiopia, and more importantly, from a South perspective, from an Indian perspective, Sri Lanka expected to get help, and we know the kind of trouble that our neighbor has been in as far as its economy is concerned. The launch of a global sovereign debt roundtable under Indian presidency, which has led this initiative. There is substantial progress on 2-pillar solutions on global taxation. In fact, my colleagues informed me that we have that snippet ready. Let's quickly hear that and then we'll come back to our guests.
Presidency, if you go through the New Delhi Leaders Declaration, it has a huge India narrative, it has a huge India footprint, whether you look at the Deccan high-level principles on food security, whether you look at the Chennai high-level principles for blue ocean economy, whether you look at the Goa roadmap for tourism, whether you look at the Gandhinagar implementation roadmap for land restoration, or Jaipur call for enhanced MSMEs, all this will leave a huge footprint of India in G20.
That was Amitabh Kant speaking about the huge Indian footprint on the G20. There were other snippets, including some details of what the finance minister has spoken about inflation. But I want to come to you, Sunil Sinha. Some of the economic agenda items are really details which were in the sort of process. We've debated them, discussed them, but it's very clear that as far as 3 big ticket items, crypto, there seems to be clarity that there will be progress towards a global framework. Reform of multilateral development banks, again, is a process that will continue. Hopefully at the Marrakesh meeting in a few months, in fact next month, there will be further progress. And debt relief. At this stage, your first reading of the outcomes and what you particularly seem enthused by. Sunil Sinha.
Look, one of the things that comes to my mind is that, most of the international negotiations, used to take place at some of these, either at UN or WTO and such institutions. But over the years, what we have seen is that the efficacy of these institutions has not delivered as per the expectation or whatever was the desired. And in the place of that, what we have been witnessing across the globe is that various kinds of, the forums have evolved where like-minded countries have come together and tried to build consensus. So in my view, G20 is, grouping in that direction. And I'm happy to see that major progress has been made on various occasions, including the financial and economic issues. My own sense is that, given the geopolitical situation, probably every country is realizing that the kind of, years that have really panned out since the global financial crisis is not in the interest of any country. Somewhere, majority of the deadlocks, particularly with respect to financial and economic issues, needs to be navigated, negotiated, and settled. So, in that respect, if the G20 summit at New Delhi has made progress, then I think that's a welcome development.
Let's listen into what Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had to say about some of the key aspects of the Delhi Declaration.
Agreement on the need for a better, bigger and more effective MDBs. It is so necessary to have better, bigger and more effective MDBs because the developmental demands from all across the globe is so high. These institutions will have to be better and bigger. This is also going to contribute to enhancing representation and voice of developing countries in the decision making. The second under the MDBs, strengthening of MDBs, is the G20 Independent Expert Group on strengthening MDBs, and this was established and it has submitted its volume 1. The first report, their report consists of 2 volumes. The first volume has already been submitted. The report recommends a triple agenda that dovetails with the call for the bigger, better and more effective MDBs. The third point in strengthening MDBs is the agreement to collectively work towards boosting World Bank's financing capacity. Here the options will be explored that will deliver a powerful boost to the IBRD headroom to support low-income and middle-income countries. And the fourth, endorsement for the G20 roadmap for implementation of the recommendations of an independent panel on capital adequacy framework of the MDBs.
Shankkar, I come to you again to take up the point about Ukraine. You mentioned and touched upon it briefly, but just for the benefit of our viewers, what could have possibly transpired to see this unanimity on as contentious issue as Ukraine, and the subtext obviously being that the summit is in India and India has a decades-old relationship with Russia, which it maintained even at the cost of antagonizing European powers and America. Shankkar
Aiyar. Much of geopolitics is about punctuation, so use of language. So the problem that the world faces is 2 of the 5 Security Council members are willy-nilly on one side of the divide. So the first option for Russia and China had been to not have any mention of the war, but that bus has left, and then since Bali mentioned the war, the contentious issue this time was the West wants the phraseology of war on Ukraine. Now that puts the G20 in a position of judgmental position. So it has to take a call with who is the invader, or it sort of gives the impression that it's a one-way war. And even though much of the world thinks so, but the G20 necessarily has to be balanced. So instead of the war on Ukraine, the phraseology was shifted to war in Ukraine. And so there was a template available from the Bali declaration, the use of nuclear weapons and stuff. What is interesting is, as I mentioned, that there is a specific phrase that is there in para 13, which speaks about territorial integrity, sovereignty. And so there is an underlining of the greater concern among the other nations, the rest of the world, that this cannot persist. And there's also considerable effort to push for a solution. So there's talk about peace. We already had statements about the consequences of war, and we all know what the consequences are. We've seen it through inflation and other cost of living issues. I think the blockade was really China, and so it was a smart move to engage the other emerging economies, Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, because these are the countries which have leverage in the global economy. The BRICS formation, of course, includes China and Russia. So, what we have done is surgically sort of delineated the naysayers. So India has played a pretty good role in balancing and carving the middle path on the geopolitical statement. This also helps India push its agenda. I mean, the inclusion of the African Union is a spectacular success story. I don't know whether we still call it G20 or G21 now, since the African Union has been included. But it's a great story, and in the pushing for reforms in the multilateral institutions, again, it's a big development. But at the end of the day, Siddharth, real politics will sort of kick in on Monday. China, Russia, and North Korea are meeting in Vladivostok. China has banned foreign digital equipment, phones, and laptops. So the world will sort of move around. And so the role of the G20 is to voice the concerns of the world. And the Delhi Declaration does that pretty well.
The Delhi Declaration does that pretty well, but realpolitik will continue, and that is the reality that we all have to face. Sunil Sinha, I'm coming back to you, and even as I do that, one of the next things that is going to happen very shortly is the launch of a global biofuels alliance, again an initiative which India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have focused on. Remember, the International Solar Alliance is also something that India has championed. And if you take a broader, longer term view, this is India's attempt to ensure energy self-sufficiency and reduce its dependence on oil imports. Sunil Sinha, there are other details, but like our guests have been saying, viewers, the G20 declaration language is more in the terms of a lofty aim, a broad strokes umbrella wordage, and not really specific announcements that you would expect in a press release. But Sunil Sinha, there is also a mention of green development for a sustainable future, and with the biofuels alliance and what has happened in the solar alliance, you think these are concrete steps that India's economy will benefit from in the medium term?
Well, if you look at India's own story so far as non-conventional energy sources are concerned, I mean, the way we have focused on solar, wind energy over the last couple of years clearly indicates that India in itself is very serious about taking the necessary steps to reduce its footprint of fossil fuel and generate energy more and more from cleaner sources. So in that sense, certainly India's effort in this direction to ensure a global biofuel footprint and making it a kind of global movement, so to say, like Solar Alliance, now Biofuel Alliance. All of these are very much not only in the interest of India, but also in the interest of a larger humanity. I mean, it doesn't matter in which country you belong. But the kind of climate change that we have seen in the last few years, the kind of the destruction the climate change has brought about. The most recent one, of course, is the scenes that we saw in the case of Hong Kong. All of that is a clear indication that movement towards biofuel and also reducing the carbon footprint is the need of the hour. And if India has taken a lead in that direction and able to convince the global leaders to come forward and go for a biofuel alliance, I think it's certainly a step forward and is in important and also important from India's own perspective. And lastly, I mean, let's not also forget that the way the oil price have been moving, the way the cartelization is happening, all of that doesn't augur very well for the overall, energy related issues which the global, both North and South are facing at the moment.
All right. Dr. Garg, please hold on for a moment, because I want to bring in a slightly different, smaller aspect as far as the Delhi Declaration is concerned. My colleague Sakshi Batra here with us. Sakshi, you picked up something of interest to the equity markets, and I, for one, wasn't expecting anything to be said about the equity markets. Take our viewers through what's been said, and is it kind of going to make an impact when the markets open Monday morning?
Well, absolutely, Siddharth. If you see the kind of tailwinds that have been working in favor for the Indian government at large to ensure that we have a successful G20 summit. At the first day, nobody expected it. We have a full consensus, and perhaps this is going to lead to the Indian markets touch all-time high levels right on Monday. We are just 1% away from the Nifty touching all-time high levels, and that may be seen, and 20,000 mark may not be all that far away. We're already at the historic valuations of $3.8 trillion, and that's what has made a great tailwind for the Modi government as well, as then when we are looking at the meteoric rise of India at a global stage as well. And this may be something that one may have to watch out for, because with the kind of growing confidence that global economies have now on India, the foreign investors are pouring in like never before again. There was a period in time that they were big sellers, but we've seen all of July, all of August that they've started to pour back in money. In fact, whatever we had lost in the year 2022, we have regained all that money in foreign investors. There's no way that foreign investors can stay far away from the Indian markets, because this is India's growth story that everybody is betting on.
India's growth story that everybody is betting on. And viewers, I want to tell you, the Global Fuel Alliance, Biofuel Alliance, has been launched. I briefly got to see some of these details here at the International Media Center. The Prime Minister was accompanied by several leaders from different countries, including Singapore, Bangladesh. Those are the initiating members, including Argentina, and this Biofuels Alliance is also going to be significant. We'll get you more details on that as we progress and as we understand what really has been done here. Dr. Garg, I'm coming to you, and an open question really, if you manage to see some more of the fine print, the message from that you would want to read, but the key question here, when it comes to the overall effort by India over the past several years to set the agenda in several areas as far as the economy is concerned, what's your own sense about this entire effort and how it would help improve and increase India's potential, including as an investment destination?
See, two things. Number one, G20 is a mechanism which was supposed to bring some coordinated decisions on the key issues which the global economy faces. As you know, global financial crisis is when it was born at the leaders level, and it did a lot of work to solve it. It did take up the taxation reforms, some of the multilateral reforms as well. The agenda setting is another role which has begun, which means that you are actually not leading to any decision, but you are taking forward the process of discussions and consensus building on that. From that point of view, in the finance and the economy group, if you look at the multilateral reforms issues, the report 1 has only come. The report 2 is still not come, and therefore we can't really say that there is any decision on reforming or capitalizing or expanding the mandate of the multilateral banks. That is far away. So good that the process, the path is there, but not. Look at the other which you quoted initially, the DPI issue, right? DPI is a payment mechanism where public digital infrastructure is what India has adopted. It has done phenomenally well in terms of making the payment systems through UPI and others very successful. But that is not the way the global payment systems work. Most of the global payment systems work through credit card and other mechanisms, and therefore there is reluctance on the part of the rest of the world to adopt the DPI or the public digital infrastructure for payments as the way to go. So if you see the language suggests that the India's proposal is integrated with the work which the financial inclusion group is doing, and in 4 years from now, there would be further exploration. If you take it in terms of the actual outcomes, this amounts to very little. And that is what I would suggest, that when we really analyze the import and the implications of the decisions or the consensus recorded in the leaders' declaration, that is where we would see what impact. Now, the last point you made about whether investments flowing into India, I don't think these G20 declarations have anything to do with flow of investments in India. It's not a bilateral. It's a multilateral consensus building mechanism. Right. So I don't see any impact on that front.
Fair point. Shankkar Aiyar, one question to you before we let you go. I know you have other commitments lined up, and the question is beyond the Delhi Declaration, because like you said, it was a bit unexpected. We were prepared for recapping several of the other things, but do you think that one of the best decisions, if not the best decision, is the inclusion of the African Union in the G20 and making it G21, and India getting the formal credit and that happening in New Delhi?
Absolutely. I think we began with the idea of voicing the global south, being the voice for the global south. And while India might be the fifth largest economy in per capita terms, we're truly global south. So what we have done is expanded the constituency of those who are still developing, set the agenda for the development of those countries. So all of this biofuel alliance is to also an interesting initiative, because the solar and renewable space has cost implications and dependence on certain countries. The Biofuel Alliance reduces that dependence. It also is economically viable for countries with 300 days of sunlight like India has. So some of this is dovetailing into the future idea. But remember, much of this is bringing, it's like documentation for the future. The idea of the digital physical infrastructure, where we can sort of expand our influence, India's influence in the world, is to offer this. And I think already some 11 countries have signed on with India's institutions in Bangalore and Chennai and the MOSEP group to bring them similar platforms for inclusion. And when you have a larger constituency, and which is why, again, coming back to your question of Africa, inclusion of Africa, I think it's a big step because you expand the constituency for your way of thinking.
Absolutely, Shankkar, and even as you were speaking, we've got confirmation from top government sources. The India, Middle East, Europe connectivity corridor is set to be launched soon. Remember, this has also been in the news for the last day and a half, and sources telling us that this will be a historic and first of its kind initiative on cooperation, on connectivity and infrastructure involving India, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, France, Italy, Germany and USA. Some of the EU countries being mentioned separately there, but very clearly if you look at the geographical footprint, this is going to be significant. And while we have not focused on China and the politics of the G20 viewers, it's very clear that much of what has been done through some of these specific steps, including the bilateral, some of those details with the United States, it's clear that China continues to be something that India wants to address on a priority. But before we get into the connectivity corridor, I'm going to bring in Chetan Bhutani, my colleague who's here with us. He tracks the infrastructure space. And Chetan, as far as infra is concerned, one is this connectivity corridor, but before that, what details do you have on the global biofuels alliance? What is it really all about?
Well, Siddharth, your Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri on February 11th announced at the India Energy Week that there would be a global biofuel allowance. The India, US and the Brazil in particular account for about 85% of global ethanol production, with US holding 55%, Brazil 27%, India at a meager 3%. So bioenergy or biofuel for our viewers is a agricultural waste generated from its consumption, and of course the utilization of the biomass is what the country's plans to do in the biofuel alliance. However, alliance will be aimed at facilitating cooperation, intensifying the use of biofuels, including in the transportation sector, which really means, if you remember, Siddharth, India, in fact, on the contrary, launched the first bioethanol car launched by Toyota. Union Minister Nitin Gadkari launched it. So India is indeed taking strides in the biofuel sector. But yes, in the times to come, we are about to hear more finer details of the biofuel alliance.
So, very clearly, you know that you track Nitin Gadkari quite closely, and I believe that if it were left to him and as part of the Indian government, they would move very, very quickly to phasing out ICE engines, Chetan. Is that impression correct?
Absolutely, Siddharth. In fact, when we meet Nitin Gadkari and on various public forums and in his interview to Business Today TV, he has multiple times, pointed out how he's actually selling municipal waste and converting that waste into a fuel. In fact, he has also given the charge to Indian Oil Corporation's Panipat refinery, and he has told them to work on fuel waste. In fact, he is also using NTPC's fly ash that actually goes waste into constructing roads. So there are 3 to 4 prime examples when the government is literally planning to utilize fuel waste into wealth. And of course, with the highway building, with the automobile sector also, Siddharth, you're absolutely right that the government is on a path to having more fuel efficient cars, having more healthier and greener cars.
Greener cars, and this is very, very significant. And viewers, I can tell you the Prime Minister launching this connectivity corridor is also a very significant move. Sunil Sinha, you've been here with us. These 2 corridors, the connectivity corridor and the biofuels alliance, how would you respond to these initiatives?
Well, as we all know that as we move into the future, the fossil fuel is something which is will be a kind of a no-no, and gradually we have to move away from fossil fuel.
Sunil, Sunil Sinha, hold your thought there, because let's take a quick listen into what the Prime Minister is saying.
सोशल, डिजिटल तथा फाइनेंशियल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में अभूतपूर्व पैमाने पर निवेश हो रहा है। इससे हम एक विकसित भारत की मजबूत नींव रख रहे हैं। हमने ग्लोबल साउथ के अनेक देशों में एक विश्वसनीय पार्टनर के रूप में एनर्जी, रेलवे, वाटर, टेक्नोलॉजी पार्क्स जैसे क्षेत्रों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट्स इंप्लीमेंट किए हैं। इन प्रयासों में हमने डिमांड ड्रिवन और ट्रांसपेरेंट अप्रोच पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया है। पीजीआईआई के माध्यम से हम ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर गैप को कम करने में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दे सकते हैं। फ्रेंड्स, भारत कनेक्टिविटी को क्षेत्रीय सीमाओं में नहीं मापता। सभी क्षेत्रों के साथ कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाना भारत की मुख्य प्राथमिकता है। हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी विभिन्न देशों के बीच आपसी व्यापार ही नहीं, आपसी विश्वास भी बढ़ाने का स्रोत है। कनेक्टिविटी इनिशिएटिव्स को प्रमोट करते हुए कुछ मूलभूत सिद्धांतों का सुनिश्चित किया जाना महत्वपूर्ण है, जैसे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय नॉर्म्स, रूल्स तथा लॉज का पालन, सभी देशों की संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान, डेट बर्डन की जगह फाइनेंशियल वायबिलिटी को बढ़ावा देना और पर्यावरण के सभी मापदंडों का पालन करना। आज जब हम कनेक्टिविटी का इतना बड़ा इनिशिएटिव ले रहे हैं, तब हम आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सपनों के विस्तार के बीज बो रहे हैं। मैं इस ऐतिहासिक अवसर पर सभी लीडर्स को मैं बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं देता हूं और सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
Thank you, sir. India and the United States of America co-chair this initiative, and now, as the co-chair, I invite the President of the United States for his remarks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, all my colleagues. This is, someone once said in a similar domestic action that was positive, this is a big deal. This is a real big deal. And I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. One Earth, one family, one future. That's the focus of this G20 Summit. And in many ways, it's also the focus of this partnership that we're talking about today. Building sustainable, resilient infrastructure, making quality infrastructure investments, and creating a better future. A future that presents greater opportunity, dignity, and prosperity for everyone. Last year, we came together as one to commit to this vision. And this afternoon, I want to highlight the key ways in which the United States and our partners are working to make this a reality. Economic corridors. You're going to hear that phrase more than once, I expect, over the next decade. Economic corridors. As we work to address infrastructure gaps across low and middle income countries, we need to maximize the impact of our investments. That's why a few months ago I announced that the United States will work with our partners to invest in economic corridors. In practice, it means we're focusing on regional infrastructure projects that deliver results across multiple countries and in multiple sectors. And today I'm proud to announce that we've finalized a historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across two continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East. And I want to thank the sponsors. And I particularly want to thank Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and President von der Leyen and the European Commissions. And since he's not speaking today, I wanted to, well, maybe he is speaking today. I had a note he wasn't speaking. At any rate, I'm going to stop there. In the sub-Saharan Africa, we're working in a private-public partnership as well to invest in a trans-African corridor. That includes a new partner, the European Union. President von der Leyen, thank you for making this very possible. Together, as part of this corridor, we're going to invest in a new rail line that will extend from the western port in Angola to the DRC, to Zambia, and ultimately the Indian Ocean. It's a project that's about far from just laying tracks. It's about creating jobs, increasing trade, strengthening supply chains, boosting connectivity, laying foundations that will strengthen commerce and food security for people across multiple countries. This is a game-changing regional investment, and both of these are huge, huge steps forward. But they're far from the only ones. We're continuing to make big investments in infrastructure around the world. That includes a solar energy site, an insulin manufacturing facility, an electricity project right here in India. We're continuing to develop economic corridors across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And together with our partners, we're working to mobilize the trillions of investment needed to close infrastructure gaps around the world, including the formation of a new investor forum that the United States will host in a couple weeks. Let me close with this. The world stands at an inflection point in history, a point where decisions we make today are going to affect the course of our future, all of our futures for decades to come. A point where our investments are more critical than ever. So together, let's continue to work as one to seize this moment in history and maximize our collective investments, to find new partners, to unlock new capital, because when we invest in low and middle income countries, all countries benefit. When we invest in emerging economies, all economies benefit. And when we invest in the future of people anywhere, people everywhere benefit. So I want to thank you again for being here. I look forward to working with all of you, and I'm going to turn it back to the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We now invite the Crown Prince and the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for his remarks.
أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي الحضور الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني اليوم نجتمع في هذا البلد الصديق لتوقيع مذكرة تفاهم بشأن مشروع ممر اقتصادي بين الهند والشرق الأوسط وأوروبا، وذلك تتويجا لما عملنا عليه سويا خلال الأشهر الماضية لبلورة الأسس التي بنيت عليه هذه المذكرة، بما يحقق مصالح مشتركة لدولنا من خلال تعزيز الترابط الاقتصادي وما ينعكس إيجابا على شركائنا في الدول الأخرى والاقتصاد العالمي بصورة عامة. سيسهم هذا المشروع في تطوير وتأهيل البنى التحتية التي تشمل سكك حديدية وربط الموانئ وزيادة مرور السلع والخدمات وتعزيز التبادل التجاري بين الأطراف المعنية، ومد خطوط الأنابيب لتصدير واستيراد الكهرباء والهيدروجين لتعزيز أمن إمدادات الطاقة العالمي، بالإضافة إلى كابلات لنقل البيانات من خلال شبكة عابرة الحدود ذات كفاءة وموثوقية عالية. كما تدعم هذه المذكرة جهود تطوير الطاقة النظيفة، وسيساهم تنفيذها في توليد فرص عمل جديدة ونوعية ومكاسب طويلة الأمد على امتداد الممرات العبور لجميع الأطراف. الحضور الكرام، لتحقيق ما اتفقنا عليه في هذه المذكرة يتطلب الاستمرار في الجهود التي بذلناها والبدء الفوري في تطوير الآليات اللازمة لتنفيذها وفق الإطار الزمني الذي تم الاتفاق عليه.
In conclusion, I would like to commend the PGII launched by President Biden with the participation of Saudi Arabia in $20 billion. We look forward to the integration of the initiative and the Economic Corridor project, which is announced in this meeting. I would like to thank those who worked with us to reach this founding step to establish this important economic corridor. My best regard to you all.
Thank you, Your Highness. May I now invite the President of the European Commission for her remarks, please.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, it's been 2 years since we launched PGII, a joint vision by the world's leading economies to invest in the infrastructure that low and middle income countries need. And 2 years on, more large-scale projects are seeing the light, and we are presenting 2 of them today. First, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. This is nothing but historic. It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster, with an electricity cable and a clean hydrogen pipeline to foster clean energy trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, with a high-speed data cable to link some of the most innovative digital ecosystems in the world and create business opportunities all along the way. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. This corridor is much more than just a railway or a cable. It is a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations. And this is also the spirit of the second project we announced today, the Trans-African Corridor, which will connect the port of Lobito in Angola with the Katanga province in DRC and the Copper Belt in Zambia. Our goal is not only to connect a landlocked region to the sea. Our partnership will also invest in local value chains, in clean energy, and in skills for the local workforce. This is the spirit of PGII. It is a whole new approach to large infrastructure investment. It is about shared prosperity. It is about real benefits for all partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. May I now invite the President of France for his remarks, please.
Thank you so much. Everything was said, so I just want to thank Prime Minister Modi for organizing this meeting.
Well, that is one of the more significant announcements that has just been made. A connectivity corridor, viewers, and you just saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden, the European Union, Saudi Arabia, and the French President speaking now. And very clearly, this seems to be one of the more important announcements, and I'm kind of struck by the fact that there was a Belt and Road Initiative of China which has floundered, and now if you see all these big countries coming together on this partnership for global infrastructure, this corridor, it's clearly a very, very important step. Initial announcements, but will have a longer-term impact. And I want to go across to my colleague Chetan Bhutani, who tracks the infrastructure space. Chetan, how significant is this? This is just breaking, but what are the details that you've got for us so far?
Well, Siddharth, very clearly, with this initiative, it is a clear message from the government that India is ready to take one step ahead of China of the One Belt, One Road initiative. Remember, OBOR, as you correctly pointed out, is really not coming up to the mark as it should have been. But again, secondly, what really implies on the success of this India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor is, of course, the railway connectivity, which they will definitely define the relationship between all the countries. And remember, Siddharth, with this trade route coming up, India would be a biggest gainer when it comes to supplying energy, when it comes to supply grains, when it comes to supply petroleum, natural gas and others, because what you cannot travel through air is definitely you can take to road or either through railways. So if railway connectivity is done successfully, this economic corridor will give India leaps and bounds opportunities to have an integration with these countries. Back to you, Siddharth.
Chetan, our viewers and those who would understand and track this space know that India has kind of been trying to diversify both its energy sources, and this is as far as oil is concerned. We have a mix, and as we saw in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war, we saw how India took some hard geostrategic calls to ensure that its energy independence is maintained despite some criticism. The second is in terms of having the infrastructure and access to the global trade. Now, very clearly, China and its BRI in some ways was hegemonistic. India did not join it. And China wanted to create a corridor that would become export belt really for it to be entrenched and remain there. But for India and its geography, I think this is an extremely significant, extremely ambitious step. Quick point, Chetan, if you can recall, the Chabahar port also running into some difficulties despite initially a great response. Is the Chabahar reality an indicator of how difficult it is to implement such massive aims?
Siddharth, absolutely. India has a lot to learn when it comes to implementing and being a big participant to this economic corridors. Because remember, Chabahar port got great response, and now this India Middle East Europe economic corridor's success lies on a lot of learnings from Chabahar port, because the railway connectivity was one contentious issue which still it remains. Remember, India still faces a lot of issues when it comes to certain sanctions, be it the supply of tea, be it supply of rice, be it supply of various energies. So clearly these 3 to 4 items could not be resolved with the Chabahar port coming in, and with this India Middle East Europe economic corridor, it's very important for India to learn how to implement the railway structure completely again. Because in my first earlier argument as well, Siddharth, I pointed out how the government should be proactive when it comes to implementing such big corridors. India should learn a lot from Chabahar port and eventually move on towards having a successful economic corridors with these 3-4 nations.
I can also notice separately from the G20 media feed that even the Japanese leader is speaking on this very connectivity corridor, and clearly this seems to me to be one of the bigger initiatives that is being played out even as we speak, and that tells us that there is significant global will, and obviously, viewers, China is excluded from this. So far we haven't seen any commentary from China, and like we told you, the India Middle East Europe connectivity corridor has some of the biggest economies in this region which are part of it: France, Italy, Germany, the rest of the European Union member states, Saudi Arabia, still the world's largest oil producer, the United Arab Emirates, it's an economic powerhouse in that region, and India, which is clearly acknowledged as one of the largest consumption markets, and of course the United States of America. And I'm pretty convinced that this will be something that will be looked at very, very closely in terms of the implementation. This is a real infrastructure, hopefully, in terms of a connectivity corridor. It will mean a lot of effort over years, and things that will not happen within months really, but it is going to be very, very significant. We are going to take a pause on this and get back to the broader conversation on what the Delhi Declaration and the outcomes from that mean for the economy, mean for sustainability, and and for many of the other important items that concern the global economy. And with me now, Kamran Khan, the Managing Director and Head of ESG for Asia Pacific at the Deutsche Bank Group. Kamran, welcome once again to Business Today Television. We had spoken with you while you were at the B20, a very large gathering, and we are now talking soon after the Delhi Declaration was adopted. I want to ask you, Kamran, what really has struck you as the most significant set of outcomes so far?
Well, I think first of all, again, thank you very much for having me on. The way this cycle works, you have the B20, the business leaders think through certain policy recommendations, which are put to the ministers, and then it is really up to the ministers to be able to reach agreement on the path forward on such ideas. And so from that standpoint, this B20, G20 coordination has been one of the better ones in recent times. A number of initiatives that were started in the B20 are now being really looked at from a policy perspective and where consensus is being reached. The second thing is the focus on trade. And as I had mentioned the last time you and I talked, that a lot of the discussion on sustainability and ESG and all those topics is moving quite significantly from not just the COP meetings or the World Economic Forum meetings or even the B20 meetings. Ideas are now there is going to be a discussion around what is the right trade policy, how are the exports from emerging economies going to be allowed in light of the ESG standards coming up all around the world, in the developed markets. And that, I think, is the most significant one. It's not happening here, but you can all the trappings of that in terms of where this discussion goes in the future.
Kamran, I want to pick up one of the points, and I lost your audio a bit there, so I want you to kind of expand on it once again. You mentioned trade policy, and the question I have for you is how significant is the inclusion of the African Union effectively, and I don't know whether that's going to formally happen, but the G20 is now G21. Given your experience and understanding, will the African Union states benefit from this inclusion, and will it kind of help trade between the member bloc countries?
Absolutely, they will benefit, but I want to make sure that I also point out that it will benefit the rest of the world as well. So this is not a handout. Trade is good for everybody. And I think if there's one thing that the Indian leadership this year of the B20 and the G20 we need to remember is the concept that we cannot just have the group of 20 deciding what's good for the world. You've got to it has to be inclusive, and you heard that from the leadership coming over and over again. Inclusiveness, that has been added into the discussions, and I think that's good for everybody involved. Remember, some of the smaller economies, like the African Union members, they're very small. So for trade to work, it's very important for them to all work together, and then for that bloc to work with and engage with the big trade corridors globally. From an economic standpoint, we know that when trade blossoms, consumer surplus increases, and the people who benefit the most from it are the poor people who have limited access to other avenues. And so I think this would be good for the world.
Kamran, one of the other things that G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant highlighted as a significant achievement of the summit was a groundbreaking Green Development Pact. He said that this pact is endorsed by every participating country. It encompasses essential elements such as financing, a commitment to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 43%, by 2030, a doubling of adaptation finance by 2025, and the establishment of the Global Biofuel Alliance. Can you expand on that for our viewers and explain the significance, because the strands of this have been heard in the past as well, Kamra?
Yes, I think the main thing that the viewers should focus on is the focus on adaptation. So when you have governments talking, you have to think about, in the climate discussion, we talk about mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is how do we reduce the amount of emissions we are putting out into the atmosphere. And adaptation is about, once that damage is done, how do we adapt so that we can have as normal a life as we can possibly have. And as you can imagine, the adaptation issues hit everybody, but much more severely they hit people with lesser means. And so that becomes the responsibility of the government. So we would expect to see a focus on adaptation and increasing of capital and financing to support adaptation by the G20 leaders, who are government leaders, and that is their primary responsibility to look after the people. And I think this, again, there too, emerging economies versus developed economies have to come together to provide that capital.
How much capital, and this is a question that we have debated in the past, but is there any more clarity on the capital? Because as I recall, this was a sticking point in many multilateral forums in the past.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. This discussion spins around and it never concludes. My advice to your audience would be, don't get fixated first on the number, how much capital is required, because that assumes that most of these investments will not pay for themselves, that they are a cost. And that is not true. When you do adaptation, like you do any kind of public investment, and you can see that in all the dynamic countries who have progressive economic policies, when they invest, it also creates growth. It's not just a cost issue. So that's a separate issue. Now, let's talk about where the capital is going to come from. And that is, I think, the debate. And this is where the leaders have to come together, and there has to be an appropriate balance so that everybody feels that there are contributions coming from, for example, countries who have benefited a lot from the environmental degradation that has taken place over several decades. But at the same time, there are some fast emerging economies that are also on a path to, create just as much emissions. So it's very important to incentivize everybody to adopt sustainable practices. And money talks, and money obviously drives a lot of that change.
Money drives a lot of that change. Kamran, I want to ask you a broad question. Since you've been at the B20 and now this big declaration, 100% unanimity, and very clearly we are, many of us were perhaps taken by surprise, and we were expecting it to happen tomorrow and not today. Summarize it for us, sum it up for us in terms of the outcomes from a business community point of view. Could the business leaders who had gathered here at the B20 have hoped for more? Has something that was on their agenda not been done?
I think, first of all, as you know well, business leaders, they are business leaders because they always want more. So I think we should be absolutely certain that they would have wanted more. But from a very realistic standpoint, if you look at the previous B20, G20 events over the last several years, this is quite substantive. I mean, the consensus, the agreement, the ability to actually get people on the table and agree to initiatives is quite, I think that's something that India can be very proud of in terms of the outcomes that have come out. I think that there are areas where business community would still be looking to see, okay, you have talked the talk, you have written the right words. Now let's see you walk the walk. And I think that is true for everything that a large set of global political leaders agree on. But I think the consensus gives me confidence, the ability for them to get this announced a day early. Usually these things are going to the wire, to the last day, like, can we get agreement so we can have this communique out? And for them to be able to get some of these things sorted a day earlier speaks volume about the level of agreement that has been reached.
Thank you very much for joining us and giving us those quick takeaways from the Delhi Declaration and some of the other points. Always a pleasure having you here with us. Viewers, our coverage continues, and we've had in the past 2 hours an absolutely action-packed time. The Delhi Declaration and something that we were prepping for, quite honestly, and I think I speak on behalf of most of the members of the media, we were prepping for it for tomorrow, but it's happened. And we saw 2 separate initiatives being launched soon after. But I'm joined by Zarabi, one of the senior-most reporters who's covered trade, finance and policy for many, many years in the capital. She writes in the Business Today magazine and is now here at the BTTV studios at the G20 Media Center. And with me, Karishma Asudani, our reporter, the feet on the ground as far as the finance ministry is concerned. Zarabi, before I go across to my guests, I just want a quick takeaway from you. The biggest headline that you think we should be talking about from the Delhi Declaration today?
I think it's definitely the MDB reforms. It's something that India has been really working hard on. It gives a lot more voice to the global south, and I think we should wait for the second volume of the report to see how it goes. But it's a big positive because no one thought that it would actually see so much support from the G20 countries. Thank you.
Zarabi, Dr. Subhash Garg made that point, and he's consistently, practically in every conversation we had today with him, said, hey, let's wait for the details. But what can you tell our viewers in terms of what really has happened as far as the subject of MDB reform is concerned? And I'll come to Karishma also on that. Zarabi.
So the most significant thing is that the MDB reform agenda has actually found its place in the declaration, which means that there was consensus on it by all G20 members. It means that the multi-development banks which were set up after the Second World War, it means that countries have realized that there's a need to reform them, there's a need to have more voice from the global south in terms of climate financing, debt restructuring, more representation, and that is going to be taken forward.
But in here, does India get more weight in these banks? Can we draw that conclusion?
Well, we'll have to wait and watch.
We'll wait for the fine print. Karishma, quick headline from you, and then I'll go across to our guests.
I'm going to add on to what Zarabi was saying. In fact, I think one of the most important point that Finance Minister was reiterating today was about the fact of the capital adequacy framework, which is going to be a strong backbone in supporting the reforms of MDBs. And we are talking here about close to $200 billion, Siddharth, that could yield in the coming years in order to support
I've heard that before when it came to climate finance. So I'm not trying to take away from the importance of what you said. And viewers, I was expecting Karishma to talk about crypto as the preferred headline, because almost a year and a half back she had broken something that's held true for many months afterwards on crypto. But both of you, please hang in there. We are joined by a very good panel, and I want both of you to stay in and join the discussion. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, the practice head of the South Asia at the Eurasia Group. We will also be joined by Vaibhav Dhange, public policy expert on infrastructure, green fuels and sustainable mobility. He is the founder and director of the Indian Federation of Green Energy. We are also being joined by Ramakrishna YB, member of the working group on biofuels, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Viewers, we were preparing for this, and the Biofuel Alliance and the Connectivity Corridor here. Two of the finest reporters from the Business Today multiverse also here live with us. But Pramit, I come to you, a former colleague, viewers by the way, from our days earlier in a national newspaper. But Pramit, the biggest takeaways that you can summarize for our viewers at this stage from the G20 so far?
Well, I think the biggest thing, of course, was an agreement on Ukraine language. This was the big geopolitical problem. But even 3 weeks ago, I knew that the Indian Foreign Ministry had indicated that they felt that they were being able to get at least a concept of a principle where the focus was on the consequences of the war rather than who was to blame for the war. And then now we have seen that they came to an agreement, and my sense is that the instant they got all of the 20 members to say, we're on board with this language, the Indian government said, let's launch the final communique right now rather than wait one more day, just on the off chance a government changed its mind. And in particular, the government we know that they were most concerned about was China. So I think that was one of the reasons they decided to go ahead now rather than wait. The second part, as your colleagues have correctly mentioned, was an endorsement of the idea that the multilateral development banks have to be changed, not just in terms of representation, but more importantly in terms of green finance for emerging and developing economies. Right now, the biggest problem in green finance is that the bulk of that finance is going from rich countries to other rich countries, which means that emerging economies are not really being able to carry out the kind of reforms, even like India, which is an enthusiastic supporter of green transition. So the principles have been accepted. The first working group on MDB reform has been endorsed. The second report will come out in October, which will still be under India's presidency, but effectively gotten through that problem, which initially there was some concerns. We have a broad agreement, the language is somewhat vague on international taxation, crypto assets, and I think one failure, or not say failure, but a weak point was the language on debt relief, especially for LDC countries in Africa, was not strong, and I believe China was not enthusiastic about this policy. So that will have to wait or see what happens later. So those are, I think, the key points. The real game now is to watch out for the MDB reform second phase of the report, which actually just will go into the modalities of how this will be implemented, coming out in October, and then to see how many of these countries actually agree to implement it at the domestic level.
Great summary, Pramit, and hang in there, because viewers, I just want to quickly play out a small snippet of what Prime Minister Modi had said. Let's take a quick listen in, and then we'll continue this debate.
कनेक्टिविटी को क्षेत्रीय सीमाओं में नहीं मापता। सभी क्षेत्रों के साथ कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाना भारत की मुख्य प्राथमिकता है। हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी विभिन्न देशों के बीच आपसी व्यापार ही नहीं, आपसी विश्वास भी बढ़ाने का स्रोत है। कुछ मूलभूत सिद्धांतों का सुनिश्चित किया जाना महत्वपूर्ण है, जैसे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय नॉर्म्स, रूल्स तथा लॉज का पालन, सभी देशों की संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान, डेट बर्डन की जगह फाइनेंशियल वायबिलिटी को बढ़ावा देना और पर्यावरण के सभी मापदंडों का पालन करना। आज जब हम कनेक्टिविटी का इतना बड़ा इनिशिएटिव ले रहे हैं, तब हम आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सपनों के विस्तार के बीज बो रहे हैं।
That was Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's take a quick listen into what US President Joe Biden had to say as well.
Today, I'm proud to announce that we've finalized a historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across two continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East.
I'm just struck by the fact that India's Prime Minister is announcing a global initiative, and the President of the United States of America is speaking after him. Sometimes these symbolic, situations and developments tell you far more than what even words and video tells you. But Vaibhav Dange, I'm coming to you on the connectivity corridor once, and viewers, just to tell you a bit more about Vaibhav. For the last since 2014, in fact, he's been one of the key people involved in the massive highway infrastructure development program all across the country. And Vaibhav, starting on that point, this connectivity corridor, ambitious one, a global one with such important countries inside it, what is it really all about, Vaibhav Dange?
Thank you, Siddharth. I think, as you rightly said, it symbolically it makes a great kind of India's presence felt at G20. Not only just organizing it, but announcing a major economic corridor. And if you look at from the perspective what's happening globally, and there are groupings happening, whether it is China-led initiative that is happening on corridor. So I think it's a massive initiative which started from G20, and India not only should be happy that it started from when India hosting the presidency of G20, but at the same time it will play a very important role in kind of reshaping the global neopolitics in a long term, because as you know, the whole India, Middle East and Africa corridor is being talked about globally from the economics perspective, from the commerce perspective. And India announcing that initiative with everybody on board, right from US President to, the rulers of Saudi Arabia, UAE, everybody on board. And it makes furthermore important that Africa has been formally today inducted as the permanent member of the G20. So all these developments put together, I think it's a great initiative, and bringing to the table the whole infrastructure playing a great role. We have seen in, for example, Chabar port in Iran has been similar development for India to increase its presence. So I think all those put together, infrastructure, this corridor can play a very crucial role in shaping the entire geopolitics in coming years. And probably India will again play a major role in bringing that focus to the global south.
Right. Vaibhav, I'll also come to you on another part of what you currently do. You've spent years in the Ministry of Road Transport, Highways as Mr. Nitin Gadkari's minister who we all admire, millions of Indians admire as his right hand on all matters of policy. But Ramakrishna, I'm coming to you to ask you to explain to our viewers what this biofuels alliance is all about. We also have a solar alliance. We know the focus that the government of India has been putting in, different ministries as well. Why is this important at this stage?
We have the net zero target to be achieved by 2070. And India believes that, in order to get there, biofuels play a very significant role. So when we talk about biofuels, basically, we are talking about any biological resources being converted into different types of fuel, which would replace fossil fuels, whether it is liquid or gaseous fuels. So if you really look at the global drivers for the biofuel program, everybody has been looking at one is energy self-reliance, and the second is looking at how to mitigate the climate change challenges that we have. In addition to these two, India has added a third dimension, how biofuels can possibly play an important role in improving the rural economy as well as the local economy. So in this direction, India has already taken a lot of initiative. And if you know that, in the last 9 years, from somewhere around 1.4% blending of ethanol in petrol, we have reached almost about 11.7, 11.8, and we are on the target to achieve 12% blending by October, November. And then by 2025, we are looking at 20% ethanol blending in petrol. And you're also looking at 100% ethanol sales to start from sometime middle of next year. So which means that, a lot of initiative with regard to reducing our fossil fuel consumption in the country. And similarly, we also have a very ambitious plans of, making use of our wasted resources like solid waste, animal dung, and a lot of industrial waste, which can be converted either into second generation ethanol or also into biogas. So we have some very ambitious program of setting up about 5,000 commercial biogas plant to produce about 15 million metric tons of gas, which would replace something like almost 35-40% of the total gaseous fuels that we have been coming, which comes from the fossil sources. So in our journey, we have realized that in the biofuel sector, we have already ranked number 3 at the global level after US and Brazil. Now it is time for India to really look at how to accelerate the kind of growth that we have seen in this sector, and really looking at working with the global players on trade, technology, more importantly, bringing investment into this country. We are looking at in the next 5 to 10 years, something like $400 to $500 billion of investment being expected into this sector. So it becomes very important that India takes the initiative in the area of biofuels to bring about an alliance of major players.
Right. The important points there, and $500 billion investment being expected. Pramit, I want to come to you, and I must tell our viewers something that you wrote. The headline in that was "The New Look in New Delhi. G20 Summit is the first real evidence that India may have the heft to get widely different governments to agree on some key issues." And you spoke about that in your opening remarks. But you have also, in the very same article, and I want to read that out, viewers, you said India has a long way to go before it can claim to be a rules maker for the world. The International Solar Alliance has struggled with vision, becoming more about aid projects than standard setting. Explain that to us in the context of the 2 new initiatives that have just been announced.
So in the case of the International Solar Alliance, it was an impromptu organization. It was actually created as a negotiating ploy during the COP negotiations by India. But once we announced it, we found that a lot of countries in Africa and the Middle East are very interested in it. They said, why are you giving this up? Keep this up. So we began to effectively put it together. In my view, when you decide to create a multilateral organization, what you really want to do is to be able to get you are being able to set standards and rules in that sector for the rest of the world to agree to. That's exactly what the WTO and all these other organizations do. We initially, I think partly because we hadn't planned on the ISI to become a genuine body, basically converted into an aid program where we built solar projects in Africa and so on, which were popular. But that's not the same thing as being able to influence global standards. We're now moving in that direction. The Climate Disaster Resilience Initiative was again a slightly better thought out project. We now have a lot more countries on board. We're still working out, but it is partly about standards. The One Future Alliance builds on an existing Indian success story, which is our digital services, digital finance, and financial inclusion policies at home. And right now we're using the G20 to showcase these, especially to African and some Middle Eastern countries, and saying, look, this is what we've accomplished. You are nervous about being caught in a US versus China technology war. We give you an alternative. So we're going to have to see. So far, we're still facing some resistance from these countries as they wait to see what exactly we have to offer. But we're actually being able to present a concept, and we're now building a coalition around this. Biofuels is a perfect example. That one is a genuine one because the real problem with biofuels is that right now there is no international trade in it. It means it is very dependent on agricultural conditions. If there's a drought in India, for example, when the August rains failed this year, we started to see sugar production and therefore biofuel production come under pressure. But if you have a global trade in this, then it doesn't matter because you effectively have any country, let's say Brazil, that has a shortage can then import that ethanol from other parts of the world. But then you need standards for international trade for this to work. And so that's where the Biofuels Alliance, my understanding is that there isn't much of a mention in the G20 Summit because it was agreed that we would allow Brazil, which holds the next presidency, to carry on to take the baton from us and complete, if you wish, the alliance and its things. They're very enthusiastic about it, partly because Brazil is a friend, but also because that was the only way to get certain countries like China to agree to it. So we've done that, and I think we will still be considered the founder, if you wish, of the Biofuels Alliance. And it's important because it's a Global South initiative. A lot of the countries in the Global South said electrical vehicles are too expensive, electrical charging stations are beyond our ability. Right. This is we'll stick with ICE. This is a transition process, but which will help farmers. Right. Several Indian companies are now trying to develop means to move away from molasses to direct cellulose to ethanol production, which would be transformative for the agricultural sector.
Right. Important points there. And Pramit, I will come back to you in the time that we have left along with Surabhi on China and trade. But I quickly want to bring in Vaibhav Dange on this aspect. You heard Pramit, Paul. Vaibhav, weigh in on how significant this initiative is.
No, it is great initiative. In fact, India has a natural advantage of leading the entire biofuel thought process in the world. Because India has been pioneering, apart from Brazil, it is India which is playing a major role. For example, like Dr. Y.B. Ramakrishna I mentioned, we are already having 12% of ethanol. And the whole gamut of biofuel has opened up. It's not only just ethanol or biodiesels, it is bio-CNG, biomethanol, as somebody said, using biomass to create biodegradable plastics. So entire gamut of energy sector is available, and particularly for us, global South, it is important. Like countries like Brazil, countries like African countries, India, where there is a mass population dependent on agriculture, and the economies are dependent of agriculture. converting this agriculture to the energy sector will opens up some great opportunities for these farmers and for this economy to build on. So I think it's a great initiative, and as somebody said, of course, we'll have to work on creating right standards. I think on the technical standards, I think there are already standards which are conventional, and not only in India, globally, auto companies are also shifting to this biofuel mode. Recently, I think 20 days back, Toyota launched a 100% ethanol car in India. So I think that transition is happening. And as somebody said, from shifting to electric could not be alone a solution. We have 20 crore cars in India. So shifting completely to electrical is very, very difficult, and it will take a long time, and probably could not be the only answer. So from the economics like India, biofuel plays a very important role because it's again a circular. It has a natural circular economy in the concept of biofuel. So you generate, produce biomass and then produce energy and use it and again generate a biomass. For example, Delhi has so many times seen the pollution impact which is happening because of the agriculture burning happening in the Haryana and Punjab region. And converting that entire to bio-CNG and ethanol using second generation technology and other things can be a major game changer, not only for the fuel solutions, but also addressing the carbon issues.
Right. Ramakrishna, very quickly, in terms of the next steps, and Pramitpal Chaudhary explained the next steps and the role of Brazil, because that is the next presidency. What can we expect in concrete terms? And I also ask you this question in your capacity as the former chairman of the working group on biofuels in the ministry.
Has provided the lead when it comes to the second generation and third generation technologies are concerned. With regard to converting the agro residues into bioethanol, India is setting up something like 4 commercial plant as against 3 commercial plants that exist in the rest of the world. We are also on the third generation ethanol. We are also looking at capturing the carbon from various industries and converting that into ethanol. World's first such plant has been set up in Panipat, where the flue gases from the refinery is being captured and it is being converted into ethanol. So when it comes to the technology front, we are providing the leadership. And with regard to the potential to produce the ethanol, from the first generation ethanol, whether it is through the molasses route or the surplus grain or the grain unfit for human consumption, we can produce up to about 20 billion liters. And we are already on the track to produce this kind of volume. The infrastructure is being created. But when it comes to agri residues and carbon capture, we have the potential to produce something like 50 to 70 billion liters of ethanol in this country. So which means that we will be a major global producer of ethanol, and we will be in a position to even export it out of the country. So these kind of opportunities have to be capitalized. And when we are on the path to achieve net zero, we are going to be reducing our carbon footprint, and we have to think in terms of trading the green credit that we are going to accrue from all these kind of activities. So from all this point of view, it becomes very important that through this alliance, we look at how we can trade globally, how we can bring in the investment into this country, and also looking at technology exchange is concerned.
Absolutely. And viewers, it's very, very clear that India's energy security cannot be from one source, and a mix will have to be followed. And more importantly, if you sort of hear from all the 3 experts here, it's clear that we have embarked on a ambitious medium to long-term strategy to de-risk ourselves and become self-sufficient. And net zero is obviously the umbrella framework. Pramit, I'll come to you, because in the remaining 5-7 minutes on the show, I want to turn the attention of the viewers to to the China question. But before I do that, Surabhi's been here. Surabhi, you haven't been able to hear our other guests, but the question I have for you is that in the run-up to the summit and through many of the working group meetings which you have also tracked, China played the role of dissenter-in-chief from everything. Fuels, minerals, a definition of green hydrogen, if I can recall. So it was like the spoiler all over. And then, of course, many on the beat did not expect the Chinese president to land up, and that was true. But from a broader trade policy perspective, the Delhi Declaration, these two alliances, some of the bilateral conversations, where do we stand as far as India's trade engagement is concerned? There are separate, bilateral trade pacts that are also under works. Where do we stand today?
So when we're talking about trade, I think one of the major things which happened today was the announcement of a India, Middle East and Europe corridor which would link rail and seaports, and it's supposed to make trade about 40% faster between India and Europe. And of course, it would also mean that, it could be seen as an alternative to China's growing influence in trade as well in a lot of these routes. So,
but is it realistic to expect that a corridor of so many countries will be able to reduce China's influence on trade? And we have seen in the past 2 years, particularly with COVID, the importance of China with regard to supply chains, and that's leading the world to talk about China plus one and alternative supply chains.
Yeah. So I think this is quite a start, and the world has realized that they do need to diversify, and whether it be China or India or any other country, they all as it is, they're looking at protectionist policies. But I think this declaration has paved the way for something very positive, and we see this corridor being set up, and India has had a lot of bilateral meetings. We're looking at
that we saw, just for example, with Chabahar. Easier said than done. And I'm not trying to play the role of a critic here. I mean, we also have to be realistic. Do you think that this very ambitious announcement will take a lot of hard work and boots on the ground?
Yes, of course. So one of the experts told me that, the G20 is just a forum for talks. The talks then have to progress, and every year, the G20 will keep having these talks, and there'll be some amount of progress. So we hope to see more progress on this, and we must remember that the WTO ministerial is also coming up in February. So that'll give you more food for thought.
Food for thought and a lot of work for us reporters. Surabhi, thank you very much for spending so much time. I know you also have to go and file copies on all that has happened, so really delighted that you made the time. Pramit, I'll let you have the last word on the show, and this is to, and I have so many questions, but I'll try and put it all together quickly. An alphabet soup for the average person to understand. G3, someone spoke about that at the BT India 100 Summit, the WTO, the expanded BRICS, now a G21. And in all of this, what would really matter for the average Indian is more exports from India, especially in a post-COVID environment. We are seeing what is happening to global trade and weakening demand. Summarize your own reading of India's place in the global trade order as of today, Pramit Pal.
So what we're seeing is the international economic system is now splitting. China has said the BRICS will now become, in effect, the alternative to the G7, a non-Western group. India and Brazil within the BRICS are fighting that. But China, having won the first round by expanding the BRICS, it will continue to pursue that. We will see that now infecting the SCO, which is not so much a trade organization, but China is effectively putting an anti-Western agenda. The G20, the concern was that China would sabotage this, but it did run massive interference against India on this, but eventually conceded that it would have to go through. But ultimately, I don't think China is prepared to invest in the G20 in the future. It just does not have an alternative to that. That split is now going to spread, and the WTO, for example, is still there, and everybody supports it, but is paralyzed. Its dispute mechanism no longer functions. Countries are carrying out trade rules which are in complete violation of WTO principles. WTO can do nothing about it. What does this mean for India? India is entering in the international trading system as you wish. We are not a major trader. But what we are seeing, and you mentioned China plus, but it's also Vietnam plus strategy and so on, is that companies such as Apple, Foxconn, especially in the electronic sphere in the initial stage, are saying it's not that we leave China, but we need a backup from China. So right now it is India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, which are basically being the beneficiaries of this slow shift. Don't look at the trade figures. Those will adjust over the next 5 to 10 years. Look at the FDI figures. That's where you're seeing China start to plummet, because this and that will eventually result in trade and supply chains moving. As somebody very senior in the Indian government said, governments in the world don't care about trade policy anymore. They care about supply chain policy, because that's where the future is, and that is partly geopolitical.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic summation. The governments of the world care about supply chains, and that perhaps is the best way to summarize what really is happening in the broader world of the geopolitical economic situation. Pramitpal Chaudhary, YB Ramakrishna, Vaibhav Dange, and Surabhi, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on our coverage from the G20 Summit, the Delhi Declaration done, 2 alliances initiative announced. But we'll be back with more in just a short while from now. Do stay tuned in. I'll see you again.